This is the story of Gaal, a man who thought confidence was all he needed to win, but in his rush to rise, he never stopped to ask if God was with him. And when pride is your only weapon, you'll never stand for long. Once upon a time, lightning danced across the cliffs of Shechem, and deep within a shadowed tavern carved into the rock, Gaal leaned over a cracked wooden table, tracing battle lines through spilled salt. The tavern had no sign, no path led to it. Locals whispered that it used to be a smuggler's hideout before it became a meeting place for those with dangerous dreams. Wind howled just beyond the arched stone doorway, but inside, the torchlight flickered like it was listening. Gaal's finger hovered over the table. "We don't wait till morning," he said, voice low. "We strike when the storm is loudest." Behind him, the fire snapped inside a pit built into the wall. 3 men, mercenaries, drifters, and loyal fools, watched him with half-empty cups and wide, nervous eyes. Gaal didn't look at them. He was staring past the salt, past the carved plan, past the crumbling ridge where Abimelek's palace sat like a vulture's nest above the city. In his mind, he was 12 again, kneeling in a goat-hide tent, watching his father die with a knife wound across his ribs. "They followed him because he smiled, Gaal," his father had gasped. "Abimelek smiled when he promised them power, but power doesn't smile back." Gaal had nodded, but that was the day he decided something bold. "If people follow power, then I will become power." Back in the present, one of the men coughed behind him. The guards— "We'll be drunk," Gaal interrupted. "Abimelek's men always drink when it storms. Makes them feel safe." He wiped away the salt map with one swift motion and stood. Outside the cave, lightning split the sky again. Wind screamed against the rocks. The whole mountain shook like it was waiting for something foolish to begin. Gaal ran one hand over the carved lion ring on his finger, his family's only heirloom, a reminder that once, long ago, his bloodline mattered. "Tonight," he said, stepping toward the stone archway, "we remind them who the lion really is." No one cheered. No one had to. They simply rose, gathered their blades, and followed him into the storm. And far below, the city of Shechem slept under the weight of a man's pride that was about to wake it up. The rain came sideways as Gaal and his small group crept down the narrow cliff path. Each step was slick. The rocks groaned beneath their feet. Below, Shechem glowed faintly, lanterns swinging in the city towers like sleepy eyes that hadn't yet noticed what was crawling down toward them. Gaal didn't speak. His jaw was tight, and his lion ring dug into his hand. One of the younger men behind him muttered, "Are you sure about this, Gaal?" Gaal didn't stop walking. "Do you want to keep kneeling to a murderer?" "No," the boy whispered. "But he's king." Gaal turned sharply, rain streaking across his face. "He made himself king," he said, "with blood, not blessing." The group went quiet. In Gaal's mind, another memory stirred. He was 19, racing through a field after a skirmish, dragging a wounded friend behind a broken cart. That's when he first saw Abimelek's men burn a village just to prove they could. No warning. No mercy. The stench of that day still sat in his lungs. After that, Gaal started gathering the forgotten ones, the outcasts, the angry sons, the tired workers who served and bowed but never mattered. He whispered promises into their ears. "Follow me, I'll rise, and I'll pull you up with me." Some laughed. Some believed. And some were standing behind him right now, soaked, cold, and quietly waiting for him to deliver on every single word he ever said. As they reached the edge of the lower wall, Gaal crouched behind a crumbling olive press. He hated this part, waiting, sneaking. He preferred bold moves, loud ones, things that made hearts race and names echo. But not yet. He wiped rain from his eyes and looked toward the palace. He's sleeping in silk while we kneel in mud. The boy beside him asked, "What will you do when you have the throne?" Gaal smiled, a wild flicker in his eyes. "I'll tear it down and build one of stone, bigger, unshakable." Another pause. "And then?" Gaal didn't answer, because deep down, he hadn't thought much past the crown. By morning the rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low like bruises over Shechem's hills. Gaal stood barefoot on the flat roof of an abandoned tower just outside the city gates. His cloak whipped around him in the wind, and his dark hair stuck to his forehead. He stared out over the city like it already belonged to him. Below, his men sharpened blades, wrapped wounds, and whispered plans. But Gaal? He was somewhere else in his thoughts. He remembered his mother's voice, soft, but sharp like a knife hidden in velvet. "Gaal," she used to say, "you have the eyes of a storm. But storms don't build. They break." He'd hated that. She'd never believed in him. Not really. She believed in safety, in silence, in keeping your head down when loud men passed by, but he wasn't born for silence. He pulled a small dagger from his belt and spun it between his fingers. He hadn't slept, not really. His mind kept flashing to Abimelek, how smug he'd looked when he marched into Shechem like it was already his, how he bought loyalty with blood and fear. "He's no son of Gideon," Gaal muttered. "He's a shadow." A voice called from the stairs. It was Zarek, his second in command, the one who had followed him the longest. "They're almost ready," Zarek said. "We've hidden weapons inside the vineyards near the lower gate. When your signal comes, they'll rise." Gaal nodded. "Word is," Zarek added, "Abimelek returns tonight with more men." Gaal didn't blink. "Good," he said. "Let him come home to thunder." Zarek frowned. "You sure about this, Gaal? He's killed better men than us, and what happens after? You sit on a throne made of ash?" Gaal turned slowly, eyes burning. "Would you rather sit at his feet?" he asked. Zarek didn't answer. Gaal stepped closer. "You followed me because I give voice to what you all feel. I'm not perfect, but I'm real, and I'm not afraid of men who steal crowns." He paused. "If we die trying to stop a tyrant, at least we'll die louder than we lived." Zarek looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The sun finally broke through the clouds that afternoon, casting long golden stripes across the valley. From a distance, Shechem almost looked peaceful, its rooftops warming in the light, its courtyards quiet, unaware. But inside the city walls, something was stirring. Gaal walked the edge of the vineyards just before sunset, his boots brushing over the tangled roots of the vines. The field had been abandoned after the last raid, perfect cover for what he was planning. Hidden beneath overturned baskets and buried beneath the soil, his men had stashed short swords, curved blades, even a few spears borrowed from sympathetic guards. He knelt down, brushing dirt from the hilt of one. "This is where it begins," he whispered to himself. A whisper of wind answered, carrying the scent of crushed grapes and something else. Smoke. Somewhere nearby, someone was cooking dinner over firewood. Life still went on in Shechem, even as rebellion bloomed beneath its feet. Footsteps approached. "You're really going through with this?" a voice asked. Gaal turned. It was Tirzah, the stonemason's daughter. She had followed him once, clapping when he spoke in the public square, laughing louder than anyone at his jokes. But tonight, there was no laughter in her eyes. "I thought you wanted justice," Gaal said. "I do," she replied. "But you don't sound like a man chasing justice. You sound like a man chasing revenge." Gaal's face hardened. "You think Abimelek will just hand us peace? He's a butcher. He wears his crown with blood on it." Tirzah crossed her arms. "So what will make you different?" That question stabbed deeper than she knew. "I'll lead better," he said quietly. "I won't rule with fear. I'll give Shechem back to its people. And if you lose," he hesitated, "then I'll die trying. But at least I'll die standing." For a moment, Tirzah just stared at him. "You were once the boy who sang songs while hauling water jars," she whispered. "Now you sound like a man too angry to sing at all." She walked away before he could answer. Gaal watched her go, then looked back at the field. His hand gripped the buried blade again. "Songs won't stop tyrants," he muttered. And as the last light of day faded behind the hills, he knew the time for singing was over. That night, the wine hall was alive, but not with joy. Torches flickered in iron sconces. Smoke curled along the ceiling like a slow, watching serpent. Gaal stood at the center of a rough stone table, surrounded by men whose eyes were louder than their mouths. Farmers with calloused fists, merchants who'd once been robbed by Abimelek's soldiers, guards who'd grown tired of saluting a king they never chose. He raised his cup, but his voice held no slur, no drunken swagger, only steel. "You've all seen it," he said, "the way Abimelek taxes us dry while he throws feasts for men who never lifted a stone to build this city. You've buried your sons after his raids. You've watched your daughters flinch when his soldiers march past." They leaned in closer. "You want to know what gives me the right to lead this rebellion?" he said. "Nothing, except I'm the only one crazy enough to try." A beat of silence, then laughter, then fists on the table. Then the sound of chairs scraping as men stood in agreement. But in the corner of the hall, one man stayed seated, older, wrapped in a dusty robe, his face hidden in shadow. Gaal noticed. "You don't cheer, old one. You don't raise your cup." The man looked up slowly. His beard was silver. His eyes were heavy. "Because I've seen this before," the old man said. "Men who think anger makes them brave. Men who build kingdoms from revenge. They burn fast and leave nothing but ashes." Gaal's jaw tightened. "You think I'll fail?" "I think you're strong," the old man said. "But I wonder if your strength knows how to wait or only how to charge." Gaal said nothing. He just turned away and stepped into the firelight again. "Abimelek has ruled too long through fear," he said to the crowd. "Tomorrow, we ride out and show him Shechem still has a spine." This time, every man cheered. But somewhere behind the torches and the noise, a servant slipped out the back door, wrapped in silence and shadow. He didn't stop until he was well beyond the city gates, galloping hard on a borrowed horse toward Abimelek's camp. The sun hadn't yet risen, but Gaal was already dressed in black leather and coarse linen. He paced the outer courtyard of Shechem, where morning fog curled low like breath from a beast, swallowing the city's outer walls in mist. Behind him, hooves clapped the stone, 20 men, armored with scrap metal and rusted spears. Some were old soldiers, most were farmers with fury in their bones. This is what we waited for, Gaal said, turning to face them. We don't need hundreds, just a handful of men bold enough to strike first. A boy stepped forward, barely 15, with a chipped blade tied to his belt. Where do we strike? Gaal's eyes glinted like flint. The outer post. Just a few of Abimelek's men there. We take that, and the message is clear. We're not afraid. As they rode through the early light, the silence thickened. Even the birds kept quiet. But inside Gaal's mind, the silence was louder. He remembered another ride years ago. He'd been younger then, angry over the death of his brother, killed by one of Abimelek's raids. Gaal had stormed off from the burial, climbed a ridge alone, and screamed at the wind. "You hear me, God?" he had shouted. "If you won't strike him down, I will." That was the first time he tasted the fire in his chest, and he never let it go cold again. Now, as the trees thinned and the post came into view, Gaal motioned with his hand. The men dismounted and crept low through tall reeds. The post was barely guarded, just 4 of Abimelek's men around a low stone tower. They laughed loudly over burnt bread and dice games. Gaal whispered, "Now." They attacked like thunder. 2 fell immediately. The others scrambled to run but were caught in the reeds. Gaal didn't show mercy. He never did. When it was done, he stood atop the stone tower and raised his fist. "Shechem rises!" he shouted. The others echoed him. But before the last voice had faded, one of Gaal's men pointed to the hills. "Riders," he said. From the shadowy ridgelines, horses began to descend, slow, steady, armored, at least 30, then 40, then more. At the front rode a figure in silver and red, Abimelek's commander. Gaal's mouth went dry. "They already knew," he said under his breath. "They were waiting for us." And in that moment he realized someone inside the city had betrayed him. Gaal's boots hit the earth hard as he jumped down from the tower. His eyes swept the horizon. Abimelek's army was no longer a distant shadow. They were coming fast. Behind him, the young rebel with the chipped blade trembled. We should run." Gaal grabbed his shoulder. "Number. If we run now, Shechem calls us cowards. We'll lose before the war even begins." Another man growled, "Then what? Die here in the mud?" Gaal stared at the approaching horsemen. They moved like a tide, metal glinting with cruel rhythm, and yet his hands didn't shake. He turned to his men. "You think this is how I planned it? You think I wanted to be ambushed before breakfast?" No one answered. Gaal walked slowly among them, his voice rising. "I know you're scared. So am I. But let me tell you something. I've been scared before. When my village burned, I was scared. When my brother bled out beside me, I was scared. But fear doesn't decide what we do. We do." He stopped and pointed toward the trees. "We can vanish into those woods and wait. Not run. Wait. Let them pass. Regroup in the upper caves by nightfall." One of the older fighters, gray-bearded and stiff from past battles, narrowed his eyes. "And then what?" Gaal met his gaze. "Then we bleed them from the shadows. We draw them out. We don't fight loud, we fight smart." The man gave a sharp nod. "All right, let's move." The group broke into motion, pulling supplies, silencing their footfalls. The youngest tripped once but caught himself. As they slipped into the trees, Gaal paused. He turned and looked back at the tower where he'd shouted just minutes ago. "Shechem rises," he murmured again, but quieter this time, like a question. And still, a small part of him wondered, Who had warned Abimelek? The mouth of the cave opened like a crooked grin against the cliffside, half hidden by vines and brush. Gaal ducked inside, motioning for the last of his men to follow. Their breathing echoed off damp stone walls, the only light coming from a single torch he jammed into a crack beside an old carving, remnants of some forgotten shepherd god. He crouched by a hollow near the back and rubbed his sore shoulder. "We'll rest here till nightfall," he said, voice low. "No fire, no noise." The chipped blade boy sank to the ground with a huff. "Are we safe?" Gaal didn't answer at first. He stared into the flickering shadows. Safe is a word children use when they don't want the truth. "Then tell us the truth," the older man said, arms crossed, voice like gravel. "You think we can win this?" "I think," Gaal said, standing slowly, "that people will follow strength. That's what they've always followed. Not justice, not bloodlines, not even God, just strength. If we look like we can win, they'll rally. If we fall back now, they'll say we were cowards." Silence. Then a voice from the dark. It was Jorah, a man who'd once served under Abimelek but had defected. "You talk like strength is the only thing that matters, Gaal," he said, "but what about loyalty? What about the people of Shechem? Do you really care about them, or just the crown?" The torch sputtered. Gaal looked him in the eyes. "I care about freeing them from fear. From a king who burned cities for fun, but yes, I care about the crown too." He sat back, breathing heavy. "Because without it, I'm just another rebel with a loud mouth and a fast sword." The others didn't argue. They didn't cheer either. They just waited. And that's when Gaal heard it, a soft shift in the rocks, the echo of a step deeper in the cave. He turned sharply. "Who's there?" No answer. He drew his dagger and moved toward the sound. The others followed. Around the bend, in the deeper part of the cave, a man in tattered robes stood holding a cloth bundle. Food, maybe. His face was marked with dirt and tears. "I brought supplies," the stranger said, "but you shouldn't be here." Gaal raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" The man's voice dropped. "Because Abimelek already knows. Someone told him. One of your own." The stranger's words hit Gaal like a hammer. "One of my own?" Gaal asked, his hand tightening around the hilt of his dagger. "You'd better explain yourself. Fast." The man lowered the bundle of food slowly, his eyes darting nervously to the others. "I'm just a shepherd. My brother serves in Abimelek's guard. He overheard a patrol leader say they were tracking your trail, knew you came through the vineyards. He said someone sent a runner from Shechem, a friend of yours." Gaal's jaw clenched. His thoughts spun. A runner. A spy. Someone he trusted. "Did he say who?" Jorah asked, stepping forward. "No name," the shepherd whispered. "But the guard said the traitor called you reckless, said you'd lead people to ruin." There was silence. Then Gaal turned to the group. "Get up," he said. "All of you." They stood, confused and tense. "We leave now," Gaal ordered. "Split into 2 groups. Take the southern ridge trail, quietly. I'll take the rest and circle the bluff. We meet at the shrine stone by dusk." The boy with the chipped blade hesitated. "But if there's a spy, we'll find out who it is," Gaal cut in. "Just don't speak your plans out loud." He stared hard at each man in the flickering torchlight, eyes narrowing at familiar faces. Was it Tyran, who had been quiet all morning? Or Dav, the jokester who suddenly stopped laughing? "Move!" he said coldly. The group began to scatter, collecting their gear. Only Jorah stayed behind with him. "You still think this is about power?" he asked, "because it's starting to look like survival." Gaal gave a bitter smile. "Power and survival are two sides of the same blade." He looked toward the back of the cave once more, where the torchlight began to die. "We've come too far to crawl back now," he said, "and if someone's watching, let them watch me win." Nightfall spread across the hills like spilled ink. Gaal crouched behind a stone ridge overlooking the path to Shechem. His breath steamed in the cold air as he scanned the trail below, fingers curled tightly around his weapon. Jorah crept up beside him. "We haven't seen a soul. You sure this is where the trap springs?" Gaal's jaw twitched. "Abimelek's men are cocky. They think we're predictable, so we'll let them chase a ghost." He pointed to a rocky bend near the footpath. "I left Tiran's group a decoy trail to follow. When they do, we'll ambush from both sides." Jorah nodded slowly, but his voice held a question. "You trust Tiran?" "I trust no one," Gaal muttered. Far below, a torch flickered, then another. Distant murmurs rose like smoke. "They're coming," Jorah whispered. Gaal's breath slowed. His muscles tensed. The wind picked up, rattling dry shrubs along the cliff. He signaled silently, and 5 shadowy men emerged from behind scattered rocks, ready. But the torches didn't follow the trail. They stopped. They formed a line. And then a voice echoed, "Gaal, son of Ebed!" Jorah's eyes widened. "That's no patrol. That's a commander's call." From the bluff, a large figure stepped forward. Armor glinted in the moonlight, a royal crest. This wasn't a scout party. It was a royal sting. Abimelek had sent his personal guard. The figure raised a horn and blew one long, shattering note. "They knew," Gaal growled. "Someone gave them our plan." He stood, heart pounding, watching his carefully laid ambush dissolve before his eyes. The path was lit now by more torches than they had people. Jorah pulled him down. "We can still fall back to the shrine stone, circle the ridge." But Gaal's hands shook with fury, not from fear, from betrayal. "Whoever warned them knew our route, our timing." He looked at the torch-bearing commander and stepped forward from the shadows. "Gaal! No!" Jorah hissed, reaching to stop him. But Gaal had already stood tall and shouted into the night, "I'm not afraid of your king. Tell Abimelek I'm coming for his crown." The answer came quickly. A flaming arrow streaked through the dark and struck the rocks beside him with a thud. Gaal didn't flinch. He only smiled. "Let's see if their fire burns hotter than mine." By morning, Shechem was a city bracing for war. Gaal marched through the eastern gate flanked by his remaining men. The townspeople peered from behind stone archways and rooftop ledges, their eyes full of worry, not welcome. What had once been whispers of rebellion now sounded like doubts. "Are we safe with him?" someone muttered as he passed. "Didn't they say Abimelek crushed his last enemies?" Gaal heard every word, but he didn't show it. Not yet. At the public square, Zebul, governor of the city, stood waiting. His arms folded across his chest, and a tight smile curled beneath his beard. "Gaal," he greeted, "you're early. We weren't expecting such bold entrance." Gaal raised an eyebrow. "Was I supposed to wait for an invitation before defending the people?" Zebul's eyes narrowed just enough to show the tension beneath his calm. "Defending, is it? Not leading them into ruin?" "I didn't come to squabble with you," Gaal snapped. "Where are the city guards? We need archers on the wall. Abimelek's forces know we're here." Zebul hesitated. The guard listens to me, and I say we wait. Reckless decisions get men killed. I'm not here to ask your permission, Gaal growled. You may run the town, but the people want a warrior. Zebul stepped forward, voice cool and firm. And when the people realize their warrior poked a lion he can't outrun, who will they cry to then? The crowd around them had gathered now. Farmers, elders, stonecutters, even children, and the silence tightened like a drum skin. Gaal lifted his voice. We've lived long enough under Abimelek's cruelty. If none of you will take a stand, then I will. A cheer rose, but it was thin and unsure. Some clapped, others didn't. Zebul turned to the crowd. Then let him stand alone when Abimelek comes. We'll see how long pride can hold a sword. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Gaal stood in the center of the square, heart thumping. For a moment, he looked around. The people were watching, but none stepped forward. No one followed him up to the wall. No one joined him in the tower. He realized something then. His boldness had given him the stage, but not the soldiers. He whispered to himself, they want courage, but they don't want to risk anything for it. And for the first time, Gaal felt something colder than fear. He felt alone. The night sky over Shechem was too quiet. Gaal couldn't sleep. He paced the ramparts above the eastern gate, eyes scanning the hills, ears straining for the soft crunch of footsteps. The torches flickered along the walls, but no soldiers stood beside him. Only a few of his men, young, nervous, and barely trained, dozed restlessly nearby with swords across their laps. Below him, the town lay still. No drums, no warning horns, no Zebul. No one. Maybe I spoke too soon, Gaal muttered, leaning on the stone ledge. But as the words left his lips, he froze. A shadow moved in the trees beyond the outer fields, then another and another. He squinted. Torches, dozens of them, no, hundreds, low to the ground, carried by men who crouched, crept, and circled like wolves. Wake up, Gaal hissed, nudging one of his men with his boot. Up, now! The boy blinked. What is it? Abimelek, Gaal said grimly, and he's not waiting for sunrise. The boy scrambled to his feet and sounded the ram's horn. The blast echoed across the walls, but it sounded frail in the open night. No guards from the other gates responded. No reinforcements came running. Gaal's stomach twisted. Zebul, that snake, had known. He'd seen this coming. They planned this, Gaal growled. He let us take the stage, and now he's watching from behind the curtains while we're slaughtered. Flames sparked at the edge of the fields. Abimelek's army set the grain ablaze. Dry bundles lit like paper, creating a wall of fire to blind the defenders and trap the people within. They're not just attacking, Gaal realized aloud. They're punishing. He turned to his men, his voice firm. To the western gate. We hold them there. If we fall, Shechem falls. But the people won't help, he said, not bitterly, but with clarity. Not unless we show them it's worth it. They moved fast, sprinting down the inner stairs toward the courtyard, past stone homes and trembling families. Some watched from behind doorways. None spoke. When Gaal reached the western wall, the gate was already being rammed from the outside. A low thud. Another. Then a crack. He steadied his sword and exhaled. This is what courage costs. As the gate splintered, Gaal didn't run. He stood ready, heart pounding like a war drum. The gate broke inward with a crash that shook the walls. Gaal didn't flinch. He was already charging forward, swinging his sword with the force of a man who had nothing left to protect but the last shred of his name. Behind him, his men shouted, but most scattered when they saw the size of Abimelek's army pouring in like floodwaters. The enemy wore black leather and iron helms, faces unreadable, voices silent. They didn't chant. They didn't speak. They just moved in formation, swift, trained, overwhelming. Gaal's sword caught the first attacker in the shoulder, but by the third clash, his arm was aching and his strength slipping. Still, he fought. He ducked under a spear, rolled through a gap, and knocked a man off his feet. But with each blow he landed, 5 came back harder. A hand yanked him by the collar and shoved him to his knees. Before he could strike again, he was surrounded, swords inches from his chest, boots crushing his cloak. Then the crowd parted. Abimelek stepped forward, eyes calm, sword unsheathed but clean. "Well," he said coolly, "the lion roars after all." Gaal gritted his teeth. "You fight from behind walls and ambushes. Call that kingly?" Abimelek smiled. "I fight to win." "You fight to destroy your own people. They chose me. You stirred them like a storm, then left them with nothing but wind." Gaal spat at the ground. "They cheered me. You saw it. They cheer noise, not truth. And noise always fades." Abimelek raised his sword, but Zebul stepped out from behind him. Gaal's eyes narrowed. "You." Zebul didn't smirk this time. "You were brave, but pride without patience is just noise. I warned you, quietly. You didn't listen." Gaal laughed bitterly. "And you? You just wait in shadows and call it wisdom." "I wait for what lasts," Zebul said. "You want it to be a storm, but storms pass. Kingdoms don't." Gaal looked past them both, to the streets of Shechem, now filled with smoke, rubble, and frightened children peeking out of shattered homes. "This wasn't worth it," he whispered. "Not for you," Abimelek said. He nodded once. The soldiers moved in, grabbing Gaal by both arms, but he didn't resist. He had come roaring like thunder, convinced the city would follow, but in the end, he stood alone, loud, proud, and powerless. The sky turned orange as the fires died down. Gaal stood outside the city gate, bruised, bleeding, and alone. They hadn't killed him. That was the worst part. Abimelek had banished him, not out of mercy, but out of humiliation. "Let him live," Abimelek had said. "Let him be a warning." And so Gaal walked. No army, no crowd, no crown. Just the sound of his own footsteps across dry soil. He had dreamed of ruling Shechem, of banners with his name, of victory songs echoing in stone halls. Instead, birds picked through the wreckage behind him. As he walked, memories whispered louder than ever. His bold speeches, his laughter in the tavern, the raised cups, the swelling pride. All of it had vanished like mist. A boy chased a goat past him on the road. The child paused, stared at Gaal's torn clothes and battered face, then ran on. No one knew who he had once tried to be, and maybe that was the point. Far ahead, the hills stretched out into silence. No crowd waited, no throne. Just the long road of a man who had to reckon with the truth. He had fought without God's voice, moved without wisdom, and trusted only in his own pride. Once, he had said, "Who is Abimelek?" Now he whispered, "Who was Gaal?" The wind didn't answer, But something deeper stirred inside him, not power, not ambition, just the heavy ache of a man who finally saw himself clearly. He wasn't a leader. He was a warning. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, he kept walking, quieter than before.